Hi there and welcome to the Thursday show. I've got climate scientist Dr. Michael Mann joining me, and because it's Thursday, I'll be hosting a hangout tonight at 8 p.m. for paid subscribers, whether it's Patreon or Substack. If you're a paid subscriber, you should be getting a link to join me tonight at 8 p.m. We had a great time last week, almost 3 hours. Well, a little over 2 hours. So I'm sure we will have a great time tonight. I hope to see you there. Shout out to my boy Sean Nielsen up in Alaska. I really appreciate your message and everybody else's, but Sean said that he's loving the video transition, especially yesterday's clip show. You picked great clips. I enjoyed them. Thank you very much. I like any comments about this first segment, which I put a lot of work into. I've got your headlines and a clip show for you, and it's all on video. Don't I look so splotchy early in the morning? I realize now that I'm doing video, I have to care a little bit about the way I look. So I basically put on a shirt with a collar and try to wash my face, but that's about it. This bald head is ready to go. Let's do it. Here are the stories I've gathered for you, the ones that are the most impactful to all of us around the world, because we are all connected now. We hear about every bad thing that happens, and so it's easy to figure out what is happening to some extent in the world, and also it's more difficult. I think I just explained it perfectly. No questions. Well, first of all, there is a horrific, nightmarish disaster in southern Asia on the border of Nepal and Tibet. If you've seen any of these videos, I'm pretty sure I've never seen anything quite as horrific as these videos. I mean, I watched a lot of them because once you click on one thing, the platform you're on starts feeding you more of that. And I was like, I'm good. I don't think I need to see any more gigantic mudslides coming through. But an enormous flood that began in the high Himalayas tore a devastating path through a mountain valley on the border between Nepal and Tibet on Wednesday, smashing buildings, sweeping away fleeing people in a giant torrent of mud, water, and ice. At least 160 people were killed, hundreds more missing in the wake of the flood, which snapped bridges into pieces and engulfed people who tried to run but were overtaken by its speed and destructive force. That's the way that the New York Times wrote it. And it's just absolutely horrific for those people. Sending them light and love and prayers and whatever you do after disasters like that. The other big story yesterday was that Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, they own it all. They agreed to an $18 billion settlement with 48 states to resolve a lawsuit that is intentionally designed its social media platforms to addict children. This is a historic settlement agreement, still subject to a approval of a court. Meta and a group of state attorneys general, that's right, I said it right, Zats, announced on a Wednesday a settlement agreement in which the social media giant will pay up to $17 billion, make changes to its apps after allegations that its technology harms children and mental health. Wait, what? The company, which owns Facebook and Instagram, will pay a potential maximum of roughly $17 billion to 47 states, 3 U.S. territories, and the District of Columbia over 10 years as part of the settlement. Well, what are we going to do with that money? What do states do with that money? I'm wondering about that, and I have a lot more questions. And will those states ever see that money? Well, the Commerce Department has news on inflation, and it's not great. Prices consumers pay for a variety of goods and services rose slightly in July, according to the Federal Reserve's main inflation gauge. Annual U.S. inflation rose 3.7% in July, the same as in June, and well above the Fed's 2% target. So things are great. Everything's fine with the price of goods and services, et cetera, and so on. More horrific news coming out of Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo specifically. The Ebola epidemic is raging there, on track to become the worst in history. To date, at least 5,605 people have been infected since mid-May. 2,683 people have died. You're not guaranteed a death sentence if you contract Ebola. I'm glad to hear that, but still about half the people who've been infected have died, and amid a response hobbled by a severe lack of funding and rampant misinformation, according to doctors, relief organizations, and global health authorities. I can't imagine any of that has to do anything with the cut in USAID. All right. Well, Democratic states, blue states, are taking the fight against Trump's sweeping effort aimed at redistricting mail-in voting back to court. A coalition of blue states says the new United States Postal Service rule, which limits who may receive mail ballots, is unconstitutional and will upend mail voting for tens of millions of voters ahead of the midterms. And from Norm Eisen to Sky Perryman to Mark Elias, Democracy Docket, they're all pretty confident that they're going to win this. And, like they've won everything else that they put in this category. So I feel confident as a result of that too. The administration does love to divert finite law enforcement resources to pursue parochial presidential fixations, is the way that my friend Steve Bannon writes it at Maddow blog. Hundreds of federal immigration officers responsible normally for vetting the applications of people seeking legal status in the United States, they're being reassigned to search for potential voter fraud, according to officials told from the Washington Post. So it sounds like they're going from being very, very busy vetting applications to not busy at all because there's no voter fraud. There's tons of applications and very little voter fraud to look at. So I guess they're just sitting around now and we're paying them. Talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, potential breakthrough. The Food and Drug Administration yesterday announced a groundbreaking new drug for advanced pancreatic cancer, offering U.S. patients a more effective treatment against one of the deadliest types of cancer. FDA officials gave expedited approval to the first-of-a-kind pill, which blocks a mutated protein that fuels tumor growth in more than 90% of pancreatic cancer cases. It's an approach that previously eluded drug makers for decades. That is very good news. And I'm very happy to hear that. The average price of diesel in the U.S. was $5.62 a gallon yesterday, 53% higher than a year earlier. You know who's disproportionately uses diesel? I'm going to guess without looking it up. MAGA, conservatives, men, Trump supporters. How about that? In an hour-long interview with the New York Times, Bill Gates explained why he thinks the threat from AI is much greater than big tech has admitted. I'm going to listen to that today or watch it. I'm not sure. I've read about that interview, but I want to hear what Bill Gates has to say about that. I don't love Bill Gates, but he's a lot smarter than Elon Musk and probably more moral. Not that moral, not that good, not championing Bill Gates, but he ain't Elon Musk. And finally, we lost Tim Curry. Tim Curry, the very gifted actor whose, quote, gift for lavish eccentricity made him a star in movies like Clue, It, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show, died at 80. It is got to be tough. It's tough to die when he's still alive. It is, and it's really sad. And he was a big star. A lot of people very sad about the loss of Tim Curry, of course. Many of us spent yesterday watching, listening, reviewing, remembering Dolly Parton as well. That will continue for days and weeks to come, I'm sure. I really liked seeing and reading and hearing some of the things. I think I'll probably play something for you here in the clip show, which I've got for you right now. Let's get started. Those are the headlines. Here are the clips that I brought for you today. Let's start in Connecticut with Senator Chris Murphy, where yesterday, apparently, over the past couple of days, there have been ICE raids in Danbury, Connecticut. They've rounded up at least 50 people, and they're not there to protect us, is what Senator Chris Murphy ran to Danbury in his state of Connecticut to say. Here he is.
They are picking up people who are here legally, people who are in the process of applying for asylum, people who have work permits. Every single day, people who are in the United States legally are being picked up. Now, here's the other way that ICE needs to be held accountable. Let me just make this clear. Congress should not authorize a single additional dollar for ICE while this illegality continues. Right now, they are operating on a budget that was passed only with Republicans. But at some point, Republicans have to understand the evil. At some point, Republicans have to understand what they are doing. And we will continue that effort of trying to stand up not just a Democratic defense of the rule of law, but a Republican defense as well. And the last thing to say is this. This is a really important moment, as Johanna said, for us to come together, to find all sorts of ways, in addition to protests, to support these families. We are here to find your loved ones. We are here to let people know what their rights are. But this is a strong, connected community here in Danbury. I know you have the ability to do the protest, to speak truth to power, but then to also wrap your arms around the people that are in need right now. This is a moment where we can be strong together in defense of our immigrant community, in defense of the rule of law. I have confidence that together here in Danbury and through our work in Washington, D.C., we can be successful in saying to an ICE agency that is operating illegally, out of control, in complete violation of the law, that your method of terrorizing our city has no place in Danbury.
All right. Great message from Senator Chris Murphy there, calling on people to help others. More than he's nicely saying, you got to do more than protest. You got to show up for people, and you've got to help them out the way that they did in Minneapolis and so many other places around the country. All right. Now I've got for you another Democratic congressman. This is Congressman Huffman, I believe, of California. I want to play any clip anytime anybody's talking about the threat that is Christian nationalism, especially when it's a policymaker, a lawmaker, and that's exactly what happened last night on the weeknight show on MS Now. Here is some of that.
The shadow theocracy. You really get a sense for just how entrenched this movement is in the customs and the routines and the institutions of our supposedly secular government.
Yeah. I think that when we often talk about religion, I think that oftentimes the Democratic Party sort of cedes that conversation, if I will, to the Republican Party. And that's where we have seen evangelical Christianity really come to the forefront of the American conscience of what Christianity means. And Christian nationalism is played off of that in a politics that has been divided within the Republican Party of just how far to make Christian a dominant force within our politics. As you and your colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle have had these conversations, are you urging individuals in the faith community to take a more active stance of what Christianity can look like in an alternative version of Christian nationalism?
Christians are some of my best allies in this fight. So what we're going to need is a broad, multi-faith, interfaith coalition if we're going to confront this threat, because it's much further along than most people realize. But I'm encouraged when I see people like Tallarico, Reverend Warnock, and others calling out Christian nationalism. They're doing it mainly from a faith perspective, and I'm rooting for them. But the point I make in this book is this is bigger than a debate about the gospel. And I think they've probably got that part right. But this project is very far along. It is a serious threat. They're going to need all of us in this fight with them, and 35% of the country can't just wait on the sidelines for the good Christians to win the theological debate.
There you go. Jared Huffman, Congressman Jared Huffman of California's 2nd District. Apparently he's written a new book. It's called No Prophets, The Fight to Save Democracy from Christian Nationalism. I am going to get him on. I just wrote it down. It's going to happen. All right. Let's see. What else do I have for you? Karen Attiah, the award-winning journalist and Washington Post columnist, was reinstated as a result to the Washington Post after she was fired because of an article she wrote after Charlie Kirk was killed, a perfectly adequate and appropriate and normal article, as a matter of fact. She highlights the strength of organized labor and their arbitration benefits that they get, protections that they get, and here she is on Democracy Now! Yesterday.
Can I say I feel extremely vindicated. I feel quite tired, quite joyful. I'm sitting here and I'm writing red in honor of the Washington Post Guild. I'm a proud union member, and my ability to even challenge my firing, to file a grievance, and then to go to arbitration was all thanks to the fact that the Washington Post Guild and the Washington Baltimore News Guild had in their contract for binding arbitration. So as much as this is a victory for me, this is a victory for guilds, for unions, and as well as, I'm feeling very much like this is beyond just a job, beyond just me, beyond just the Washington Post. This is a victory for journalism, for anyone who wants to stand up for just speaking the truth. I was just doing my job. So I really do see this as a symbol that it's worth it to stand up and fight for freedom of expression, for journalistic freedom. And when you fight, sometimes you win and sometimes you win big, like in my case.
Love that. Love that for her. Love that for us. Very important story, and great to see her back at the Washington Post. How about this? New scrutiny for Pete Hegseth is what Peter Alexander said on his new MS Now show. And I wanted to share a little bit more about his comments on this news. Love to bash the Hegseth.
New scrutiny today about the U.S. military under the leadership of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, with a series of reports detailing chaos within the department. First, MS Now has learned that the number of service members looking to leave the military on moral grounds as conscientious objectors has skyrocketed. That's according to two groups that helped file those applications. Those who spoke with MS Now directly involved in the Iran war effort and the boat strikes said to be targeting drug smugglers, the latest round of those just last night, say they are being asked to violate international law.
All right. Well, no big deal there. Yeah, just being asked to violate international law in their opinion. And so they're leaving, wanting to leave. And by the way, a couple of professors have been kicked out of West Point Military Academy, the prestigious military academy just north of me here in beautiful West Point, New York, because they told the truth. This latest one about climate change. So a couple stories over there. Longtime listener Nick DiFabrizio keeping me connected to that narrative, and hope to see you soon, Nick. Okay, now let's get to Debbie Dingell, the congressman from Michigan, who is tired of the guilt by association questions that many in the media are asking about Hassan Piker. This is related to the senator, Democratic nominee, Abdul El-Sayed, who has campaigned with him in the past. He's now the nominee. And so Debbie Dingell and everybody else is being asked about Hassan Piker, this guilt by association thing. And by the way, it's just so pathetic, because if half of any of the Republicans were asked that type of question, Gil Duran, who was my guest yesterday, put this out, actually. He wrote on Blue Sky, every progressive gets chased around about their relationship to Hassan Piker. Has one reporter ever asked J.D. Vance about his embrace of the insane and anti-democratic ideas of Curtis Yarvin, or about his relationship with democracy hater Peter Thiel? He could have said a lot more adjectives about either one of those. But anyway, yeah, Democrats continue to be asked about Hassan Piker. Here it is, though. Debbie Dingell saying, I'm done with it. Let's focus on what matters, please.
I am done. So don't any reporter ask me again about Hassan Piker. It's not what November is about. The Republicans are trying to make it. They're trying to divide us. And we got to stop letting them try to divide us. I don't agree with Hassan Piker on a lot of stuff. And I really don't agree with him on some of the woman things he says. And I'm still trying to figure out, is it the reason he exercises and looks buff is why he has so many followers. But having said that, I want to talk to you for a minute about what November is about. November, I lead Medicare for All in the United States House. If you are sick in this country, you should be able to go to the doctor when you need to go to the doctor and get the medicine that you need. And we have ripped healthcare away from millions of Americans, and we have hungry children in our district, in our state, and hungry seniors because of what the Republicans have done. And we need to win in November, and we will reverse all of the things that they have done.
Well, that's a promise I will hold you to. Reverse everything they've done. I love to hear it. I don't know how that would be possible, but Debbie Dingell on a rampage right there. That's the kind of energy you like to see from some of the older Congress people. She took a shot at Hassan Piker. I'm still trying to figure out if he's got such a huge following because he's a good looking guy who works out. She said something like that. I mean, listen, let's be honest. The better looking you are, the more likely you are to have support and fans and followers on any platform. It's always been the case for television news anchors. Let's find the prettiest people. True of a number of jobs and sales. You like to put a pretty face out there, someone that someone wants to talk to, watch, listen to, which is, part of what holds me back. I mean, I've got humor, I've got personality, I've got wisdom and intellect, but come on, this face, not made for YouTube. I kid. I'm a strong 6. Let's move on to someone who's both brilliant and beautiful. It's Jasmine Crockett, and she was talking a lot about what inspires her. She's become a true leader in every, I think, possible way that she can. And so people look to her. Young people look to her. A lot of people ask her how she got so far, how she made it, how she's accomplished what she's accomplished. And of course, she is, I believe, the daughter of a preacher, and she reflects on her relationship with her Christianity, which I think is great for her. But sometimes as I've gotten older, I've been able to not get so turned off by talk about religion and so on, and just replace it with some of kind of what I believe my spirituality. And then it sounds pretty wonderful. And that's what I do in this clip. Love what she has to say here. So I wanted to share it. Regardless of all the religion talk, I think it matters.
My mantra is that everything happens for a reason. Even when it seems like lemons, make some lemonade. I tell people all the time that there's a lesson in the loss. My very first race for office, I lost on election day. If I had not run that race, I never would have been in Congress. That is not where God necessarily wanted me at that time, but I had to go through that in order to get where I am.
All right. Nothing too special, but I liked it. I didn't know. I forgot I had that music behind it. Okay. Moving on. I've got some Dolly for you. Should we end with some Dolly Parton? Is that okay? Do you mind? Have you seen too much? I liked this post about her yesterday. Dolly Parton, Donald Trump, both 80. One was born with nothing. One was born with everything. One lived a life defined by love, kindness, and generosity. One built his life around hate, revenge, and grievance. One could have been a billionaire, but chose to give millions away. One has amassed enormous wealth while ordinary people struggle. One is adored. One is abhorred. One is mourned around the world. The other will be celebrated. Your choices in life matter even after you're gone. And my friend, our friend, Kevin Richberg, wrote something similar in a text he didn't know I would share. By the way, if you get to be friends with him, he sends the funniest and most poignant texts. Every text is something both serious and maybe sometimes dark and hilarious. This is what he wrote. In my continuing effort to pivot from my obsession over the moon being the most important thing that ever happened to a celebration of Dolly Parton, I wanted to remind the conversation of something that plugs directly into your and my ethos. For decades, she could have been a billionaire with ease, not even an arguable point. She could have been a billionaire for all of the last half of her life, and she chose not to. She purposely created endless programs to give her wealth to the causes she cared about, refusing to keep it for herself and her heirs for her entire life as an economic powerhouse. She's literally the patron saint of Eat the Rich. The patron saint of Eat the Rich. Ooh, I love it. I love it, Kevin. And we love you as well, buddy. And now here she is one more time, and maybe as many more times because she lives on forever. Dolly Parton.
I think that everybody needs to express themselves however they feel they have to. I'm not out, like I said, I'm not out here to tell you what to do. I don't want you to tell me what to do, but I just do what my heart tells me to do. I ask God to direct me and lead me. And if I've got his direction, I don't have to worry too much about anything else. But I do understand people having to make themselves known and felt and seen. And of course, Black Lives Matter. Do we think our little white asses are the only ones that matter? No, I think that.
Oh, how about that? Dolly Parton, little God talk, and she called him he. I always notice those types of things, but the message resonates, doesn't it? In the end, just hearing her say it, hearing her say Black Lives Matter, sometimes that's all folks want to hear is that you believe that phrase. It's not like she explained it in a scholarly way, but she said it. And I think that's what mattered. Okay. Actually, let's do one more clip. Jelly Roll was in for Jimmy Kimmel, and he's making fun of Trump. And I love that when a new person gets that platform to make fun of him. He doesn't deliver a joke great. He's not exactly a comedian. And I don't love that he played and gave any attention to Jesse Waters, because it's this circular loop when you start playing their shit and they start playing yours and they like it and it's good promotion. But I like the joke. I'm here for it. Here's Jelly Roll last night in for Kimmel.
Speaking of cheese balls, let's talk about Donald Trump. The president is doubling down on his ridiculous trade war with Canada, and they're saying this could lead to higher prices for several products, including whiskey, smartphones, but most alarmingly, toilet paper. It's going to be a real World War II-ply. But you have to admit, there is something poetic about it being so expensive to wipe our ass just because the president's full of shit. Now, I have been poking fun at POTUS over the past few nights, trying to fulfill my duties as a late-night comedian. And it's gotten a lot of reactions from a lot of people on both sides of the aisle. But today, I'm really starting to feel like my pal Jimmy Kimmel, because my monologues caught the attention of the gang over at Fox News.
Happy TDS Tuesday, primetime's second favorite day of the week. We're raising awareness for one of the most infectious mind viruses sweeping the nation, Trump derangement syndrome. Next up to bat, Jelly Roll. They should put a warning label on Ozempic. Side effects can include increased risk of TDS. If you notice signs like irritability, depression, and trouble sleeping, please see a doctor.
Okay, first of all, Jesse, I'll have you know Ozempic is the only drug I haven't tried. I know it sounds unbelievable, but I lost weight the old-fashioned way. Cocaine.
All right, very funny. Funny written joke. The best joke writers in the business, in my opinion, including my friend Lori Kilmartin. Shout out to Lori. And Jesse Joyce. Both those guys are great. All right, now let's get to today's guest. That is my clip show. Those are the headlines I've gathered for you. Send me yours. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What should I include in that? Have your voice heard. Help me produce the show. I need help. StandUpWithPete@gmail.com. Of course, get a paid subscription as well if you're not already at it, because I do this every day. I talk to the smartest people in the world. And today, oh man, did I get one of the smartest. He is just, a climate scientist with like 1 billion degrees published everywhere and friends with people like Leonardo DiCaprio. He is, most importantly, his day job is at the University of Pennsylvania. No big deal, just an Ivy League school. For Dr. Michael Mann, his new book that he wrote with our friend Peter Hotez is now out on paperback, and he's written several other books that you have to get as well. But we're mentioning and plugging Science Under Siege, How to Fight the 5 Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World. That is the book that we're plugging today. So definitely go get that. Definitely follow Michael. He is a huge supporter of mine and always has been. So go follow him on all the platforms. I'll link to more about him in the show notes. Let's do it right now with my conversation, which was live on Substack the other day with Dr. Michael Mann.
I don't know.
Well, there you go. Me and you with these two heads, I feel like if someone's scrolling by, they're stopping.
Yeah, I agree. Or they think they're seeing a moon landing. One way or another, sure. There's something going on here for sure.
They're not sure. The channel is something about two bald white guys. Well, at least one of us is
we can do a show. Two bald white guys.
Smart climate scientists who you've seen appearances in all of the media. There's nowhere that he has not appeared or outlet that has not invited his comment for expertise, and I'm always happy to have him. We go way back. His new book that he co-wrote with another friend of ours, mutual friend, Dr. Peter Hotez, Science Under Siege, How to Fight the 5 Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World, is unfortunately extremely relevant. You should go get it right now. He's at the University of Pennsylvania, but you can't hang out with him if you're in Philadelphia, but I can because we're friends.
It's great to see you. Always great to talk with you, my friend.
Oh, man. I'm sorry that I called you because of the records that we're breaking, but I did see Hottest July, and then I think I saw yesterday the Copernicus, whatever that measurement or initiative or organization is, measured that the oceans, we set a record for hottest average, I think, ocean temperature yesterday or at some point this week. And so obviously we're always breaking records, it would seem, every year. But you've been educating people all over the world about how the El Niño is playing a role this year. Or is it El Niña? I forgot already.
Yeah, well, you're right. Copernicus is the website of the EU's basically science foundation, and they like to remind us that their science goes much farther back than ours. Hence, Copernicus. We go back. Benjamin Franklin, of course, is we like to celebrate him here at Penn.
It's our OG, yeah.
That's as far as we go back, really. So, yeah, I mean, all of the different platforms, whether it's, the European platform, there are dozens of websites you can go to for the latest analyses of our climate data, temperatures, sea level, sea ice, whatever you want to look at. You can look at it almost in real time now. And so we can actually see how the global temperature is varying day by day. And we have set records this year, the warmest summer on record for large parts of Europe, for a large part of the United States. the warmest month that the planet has ever seen. That was this last month.
We did it.
That is where we are.
We did it. Congratulations to us, right? We did.
Hottest ever. It almost sounds good, doesn't it? Hottest, in a world where hot is supposed to mean good, we have to remind ourselves that hot is bad when it comes to our climate.
Well, it would seem that whatever records we're breaking here in August could be just the beginning of it. It's only the 8th month of the year. Apparently, that's how you guys measure stuff. And the El Niño is supposed to be a lot getting worse in November. It peaks, or what's coming, would you say?
Yeah. So I was one of those people back in sort of late winter, early spring, when some of the projections of El Niño were coming around and people were starting to talk about a Godzilla El Niño, a monster El Niño. And I'm like, let's let the predictions bear out. There's something called the spring predictability barrier when it comes to forecasting El Niño. It's very hard to tell what it's going to do until you sort of get past the spring months and into the summer. And so once we got into the summer, it became clear that, we've got a monster El Niño on our hands. We have the biggest El Niño on record happening during the warmest year or second warmest year thus far, depending on the precise measurements on record. And what that means, so El Niño is this natural cycle, and it exists on top of the overall warming of the planet. So you've got ups and downs. It comes and goes every few years. We had a big El Niño in 2023 and 24 that helped boost global temperatures to the hottest they'd ever been. Things cooled down a little bit, and now we've got another El Niño, and we're probably going to break that record because each time we get an El Niño, it's sitting on a warmer overall planet. And so we reach new levels of warmth. It sort of gives us, if you like, a taste of our future, because at least for the next year or so, global temperatures are going to be elevated even beyond where they are from fossil fuel burning by the addition of this natural effect. But it'll push us beyond certain thresholds. The warmest we've ever seen. We will see weather events that are more intense than anything we've ever seen because of this natural effect that is superimposed on an ever-warming planet, this ramp that just keeps on rising until we do something about our carbon emissions.
I guess everybody's self-interested in terms of how climate crisis affects weather and how that weather affects their region of the world. But tell us a little bit about what we're more likely to see in different regions of the world later this year and how we need to be thinking about that. At least, there's not much we can do to prepare as individuals. Certainly as local communities, you can, though, and you can organize your state. And obviously we can elect policymakers that will think about, what's going to happen tomorrow and not just today's news cycle and quarterly capitalism. But what are you predicting a little bit more specifically later this year? What might we see?
Well, let's talk about what we've already seen, because we've seen, record hot conditions over a large part of the United States. You were probably choking on the same wildfire smoke that I was choking on earlier this summer. And that was because of an epic wildfires up in Canada due to the heat and drought there and winds that bring all that wildfire smoke east into cities like the one I live in, Philadelphia, or New York City, where, we were dealing with some of the worst air quality in the world, dangerous air quality. If you're outside for any length of time, it actually poses a danger to your health. That's what we're dealing with now. And so even those conditions were connected to a climate change related event. So it's the heat, it's the drought, it's the floods, it's these extremes in all directions. Floods, we see worse flooding. We also see worse droughts. The extremes get larger. Yeah. And when the heat and drought combine, we get those wildfires. And the impact of them doesn't stay isolated. If there are wildfires up in Canada, we're breathing in that dangerous smoke here on the east coast of the U.S. So it's a reminder that it's all interconnected, and we are seeing the dangerous consequences of climate change already. The question is, how bad are we willing to let it get?
That's right. And we're going to keep talking about that question, attempt to answer in a moment. Just reading also, Lake Mead and Lake Powell have dropped to historic lows, reaching approximately 27 and 23% capacity, respectively, as of August of this year. And so again, thinking about how America is affected, those two lakes provide, I believe, drinking water for millions of people, 40 million people for drinking water and irrigation, 5 million acres of farmland. So I don't know. I read that statistic earlier, I think it was last week when I read about those two lakes and thought, well, a huge part of the country, maybe half the country or a quarter at least, is going to be affected by that alone, or maybe there's recovery because what's coming is flooding.
Yeah, but I mean, so with El Nino and this flavor of El Niños come in different flavors. It turns out their impact on North America depends on the flavor. It depends on where are the hottest temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. Sometimes they're a little shifted eastward. Sometimes they're shifted more towards the central tropical Pacific. Equatorial Pacific doesn't sound like a big deal, but it turns out that where that maximum heating is determines how it impacts the jet stream, the northern hemisphere jet stream. And that's how El Nino primarily influences us, through the way it changes our winter jet stream. And so, for example, in 1997, 1998, it was a very similar flavor of El Nino. We got those drenching floods out west, that Pineapple Express extreme rainfall. That was connected with that El Nino event. We had a very warm winter in the northern half of the country. Part of that is global warming. Part of it was the effect of this very large El Nino. If we use that as an analogy, and it looks like it was a similar flavor of El Nino, we will probably see heavy rainfall in the desert Southwest, in the western U.S., but that is a drop in the bucket. The drought that they're dealing with is a decades-long drought, and it turns out that 1 or 2 big winter snowpack seasons or rainfall seasons, depending on where you are, up in the mountains or on the coast, barely makes a dent in the longer-term drought problem. That part of the world, that part of the country is getting drier. Hotter summers bake those soils, evaporate away the moisture. The winter rains aren't enough to replenish it. We're tapping out, as you said, our reservoirs and our groundwater aquifers, our water resources. That's like taking money out of the bank, and pretty soon your bank account is empty. That's what we're doing right now with those reservoirs and with those aquifers. So we're on a collision course. And, the western U.S., places like Arizona, where these large population centers, Nevada, that are getting larger, are on a collision course with decreasing availability of water.
Yeah. All we need now is to create more facilities or golf courses or cities in the desert to draw away more water artificially or waste it altogether, is my opinion. Because we could do without AI, if you ask me. We won't be, though. We're headed right into it. So
we can't do it without water. We can maybe do it without AI. We can't do it without water.
Just said that. But I like these robots that tell me how I feel. So let me ask you.
You're joking, but our jobs are going to be, a few years from now, there's going to be an AI Pete Dominick interviewing an AI Michael Mann. They're not going to need us anymore.
Yeah, I don't know how I think about that or how I feel about that. How much do you think about that? Obviously, we trust your judgment if it's something that you read and study a lot about. I'm going to be talking to Gil Duran coming up today at 4 o'clock.
Gil, yeah. That should be a good conversation.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and I bet Gil, and his new book is a must-read book. And I remember talking with him when it was still in the works.
Oh, yeah? Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, he's been knee-deep in California politics for a number of years.
Yeah.
Sort of really has his really has a sense of the ethos, the sort of the tech bro world, and what is he calling it? The Nerd Reich, I guess.
The Nerd Reich. Well, yeah. His new book and newsletter is called The Nerd Reich, but that's not his name. That is the name that a whole bunch of other tech bros basically gave to themselves or to others that they were looking at a bunch of these tech billionaires and how they thought about life and so on. And they called them the Nerd Right because a lot of them were white extremists, white supremacists and, male misogynists.
Look at Elon Musk, Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
I mean, all of them. If you read what they've written, you listen to what they say, it's very clear. And so that's sort of my answer to your question would be this. I'm less worried about a machine world or, the dystopian sort of futures portrayed by Hollywood where the AIs take over. What was it in The Matrix? It was machine world. And then in Terminator, it's whatever we call those AI
humanoid robots. I don't know.
Yeah, but it was the something. So it wasn't the machine world. It was there was the name of the company that that created the AI.
Watching you struggle through it and not help you is one of my things. I can't help you.
In any case, that's not what we really need to worry about. We need to worry not about machine intelligences that are going to take over and subjugate humankind. What we have to worry is about how humankind and bad human actors are weaponizing that technology. And that's what Gil's talking about. And that's what I'm worried about. The way that disinformation now spreads massively, even faster than it did, even more pervasive than it was, because AI and machine learning is being used so effectively by these bad actors we've been fighting.
If good actors use AI and other technology, good things can happen. How have you harnessed any of this to be able to predict more science, more science? Is this technology? Because we can talk about the fact that AI could potentially cure all kinds of diseases. It certainly can help diagnose. Right now, scientists and doctors are using AI just like the rest of us. How, if at all, are you using it?
Well, it's like any new technology, right? There's the promise and the peril.
Yeah.
And we saw that with the internet, and we recognized that there was promise and there was peril. And one of the perils was that the promise was for it to be this new democratizing medium. The peril was that the bad actors
democratize white supremacists. Like, it'll democratize a lot of people who are into My Little Pony and harmless get-togethers, but it'll obviously democratize bad ideas too.
And this has always been the pattern, right? Those with the most resources, those with the most power and influence ultimately are able to game those technologies to their advantage. And we saw that with the rise of the internet. We've seen that with social media, and we're seeing that with AI and machine learning. And there is the promise. That's what's so frustrating. There always is. There always is promise. If these technologies are used thoughtfully and for the betterment of mankind in the world, there's so much potential there. Look at, as you just alluded to with AI, machine learning, there's already evidence that we may be able to provide improved weather forecasts.
Well, I mean, I don't know anything I'm talking about at all, and you can give me an example. But I mean, you're known, you're famous, and conspiracy theorists infamous for the hockey stick, which measured Earth's temperatures over the years, year after year, and so on. And I'm guessing you had to compile data for that and everything else that you've done kind of by hand, year over year. Now, if you say, show me a chart of measurements of anything, in this case, Earth's temperature or something, you could have that in seconds. Am I right? Like that you can use it to measure all kinds of things in your world.
No question. And let me say that hockey sticks are on the rise right now with the new 50% tariffs. So, if you're invested in hockey sticks like I am, good time.
Can't afford to play hockey anymore. These goddamn Canadians just refuse to become the 51st state.
It's pretty amazing. That's a whole nother conversation.
Well, let me ask you, rather than continue talking too much about AI, and I will with Gil Duran, I want to get back to the climate crisis and kind of where we're at and checking in with you on that and how the rest of the world is seeing. We're also watching what's happened as Europe caught on fire and baked months after month. We relate a lot to Western European countries and talk with and are friends with and share a lot of ideas, or at least we used to. How are countries adapting to this? Because it's not when, it's now. As a matter of fact, something in my region that is as a result for sure of changing temperatures is the tick migration, and not the good ones, has been made more ubiquitous. There's more ticks and more Lyme disease and more this awful alpha-gal disease, which means you can't fucking eat meat because you went outside to frolic in your garden. It is insidious, and as a result of the changing temperatures, the warming. So how are you seeing what has happened recently in Europe, as well as what is happening everywhere else, as the fact that we're in it, we're started, it's happening. It's not when or if, it's now.
That's exactly right. And it's a mistake for us to think that there's going to be this point at which becomes clear. It's already clear. It's not subtle anymore. We're seeing these unprecedented extreme weather events, and they are damaging and they are deadly. Dangerous climate change is here. You might even argue catastrophic climate change is here. We're really, it's almost semantics at this point to debate whether or not we've reached that point. The reality is that we've already experienced a certain amount of damage, destruction, and death, frankly. And at this point, to repeat myself, all we get to determine is how bad it gets. And we can prevent it from getting much worse by rapidly decarbonizing, our world. It's still possible to do that. Or we can continue with business as usual. And the current administration, of course, would have us do that. It would have the U.S. Not only cede its leadership, which we had under the previous administration, but in fact, double down in denial and delay and deflection and do everything it can to slow down this necessary transition away from fossil fuels. What at this point, the United States doesn't really get to determine the path that human civilization will take. We see China moving ahead. We see the EU moving ahead. Other countries recognize that the future of the global economy is going to be in clean, dispatchable energy. And all we get to decide at this point isn't whether the world moves on. It's whether or not we get left behind at the station when they do. And right now, with all of the policies that we see with this administration, we are ceding all that territory, and we are losing out in the defining economic race of this century because of the policies, because of the misguided policies of this administration when it comes to energy and when it comes to climate.
In recent times, peak cooperation seemed to come, in my mind, after the Paris Climate Treaty was hard fought, corrupt, but still signed by the vast majority of countries in the world, including ours. And then, of course, President Obama's second term ended, and we got our long national nightmare. He tore it up, doesn't believe in climate change, and started disincentivizing in the first term, and certainly at warp speed in the second term, disincentivizing future renewable energy, ceding that to China and the rest of the world, and somehow trying to prop up and incentivize old world energy like coal and combustion engines, obviously oil and gas. What's the state of play right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, you just put your finger on it. Who didn't sign on to those agreements? Russia didn't sign on. Saudi Arabia didn't sign on. There were a small number of petrostates that don't want us to move on, that are profiting greatly from our current reliance on fossil fuels, that have done everything they can to block those agreements. And there's quite a bit of evidence, and it's been reviewed. Rachel Maddow, in one of her books, goes into some detail. And on her show, she actually reviewed sort of the connections between sort of Russia. Why was it that they wanted Donald Trump to win? They wanted to defeat Hillary Clinton. There was a $500 billion oil deal between ExxonMobil and Rosneft, the Russian state oil company, that couldn't go forward because of the restrictions, the sanctions against Russia for their actions in Crimea, in Ukraine. And what did Paul Manafort, who was actually a lobbyist for pro-Russian Ukrainian interests, became Trump's campaign manager. And one of the first things that he did was to get rid of some of the lines in the Republican platform that supported those Russian sanctions. And so it's pretty clear that getting Trump elected was about paving the way for this massive collaborative venture between ExxonMobil, the world's largest publicly traded fossil fuel company, and Russia's. And that's where we are today. And everything that Trump has done can be understood in terms of what best advances the petrostates, Russia and Saudi Arabia, that put him in power.
That's so true, even if it wasn't some larger conspiracy. And we know it is. I mean, you connect the dots pretty easily, the Paul Manafort thing, obviously. And
there are a lot of, false conspiracy theories. But the reason conspiracy theories exist is because there are real world conspiracies. And this happens to be one of them, hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, we know who talked to who. We know what their interests were. And even if they didn't somehow express clearly what they wanted, they got it. I mean, you couldn't have given Putin more of what he wanted. And obviously the Republican Party has almost entirely taken a knee for Vladimir Putin and his pal Donald Trump. And so we see what they're doing. Obviously, we see what's happening with the oil producing nations. By the way, have you noticed that the New York Times podcast and MS Now both have fossil fuel funding, ExxonMobil, et cetera?
Oh, I've been calling this out for years.
Yeah.
Even those sort of legacy media outlets that we would like to think of as sort of friends to truth, friends to facts, friends to science, haven't necessarily been. And Peter Hotez and I in Science Under Siege talk about just how destructive the New York Times has been in terms of editorial policies when it comes to COVID, when it comes to platforming conspiracy theories like the lab leak theory, and when it comes to platforming, if not outright climate denial, certainly climate delayism, publishing op-eds by people like Bjorn Lomborg, who are apologists for the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, that guy.
And Brent Stevens, one of their columnists, his first column in the New York Times was basically, yes, climate change is real, but no, it's not a problem. No, we don't have to get away from fossil fuels. The New York Times has actually been helping advance that sort of framing.
Wow, that was his first column ever.
That was his first column was, yes, I think it was something like, I've been to Antarctica. Yes, it's melting. No, it's not a problem. It was something almost that absurd.
I understand it costs a lot of money to run a newspaper, or especially the New York Times or any media outlet. It costs a lot of money. You have to make a lot of money to pay people to work there. And even if the climate desk at the New York Times or anywhere else did great
and
work.
They have some fantastic reporters, by the way, Pete.
Yeah, but
that's I want to make that clear. And it's unfair to them. It's unfair to so many of the great journalists at the Times that their editorial policies have basically been platforming, nonsense that contradicts the work that their own reporters are doing.
That's the point I was going to make, maybe something similar. Okay, getting back to kind of the state of play and the solutions, the way forward. I mean, we've been talking for a long time, and we've always been advocating for government solutions. And yes, that means government picking winners, future winners of industry. And by the way, they always do. Every government, Republican or Democrat, incentivizes and subsidizes some industry or another.
Donald Trump has taken that to a new level. He's literally taken that to a new level. That's the irony, right? For a party that's supposedly against government choosing winners and losers. That's exactly what Trump has been doing in rewarding companies that support him and actually demanding that the government be able to buy into some of these private companies.
But
there's a word for that, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. There were different ideas and solutions, tax schemes, if you will, in the U.S. and other cap and trade, cap and dividend. Yeah. But there was a lot of it was the government has to penalize and incentivize the right sources of energy. But now, I'm not saying I don't know what the best way forward is, but now it would seem that the market has far more of an influence, and the winner overwhelmingly is renewable energy. Yeah. The increase in technology and availability of solar, of batteries, obviously of wind and other sources that are being developed. I mean, it is advanced. It's hard to explain how rapidly these technologies have advanced around the world. But now, I mean, we've talked recently with different people. I think you probably know Anya Kamenetz, who's amazing, and others talking about how you can hang a solar panel out your balcony, even if you live in a rental apartment, or if you don't have a balcony, just your window, and provide maybe all the energy you might need for your one-bedroom apartment. Where are we in terms of solutions if government, politics, and fascism weren't a problem? My understanding is the Chinese electric cars, they go further, they charge faster, and they're way cheaper.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, if you Google, you can find a commentary I wrote for the China Daily, China's largest English language journalistic outlet. They reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to write a commentary for them. And I was happy to compare and contrast what they're doing with what the United States is doing under Donald Trump. And it's an embarrassment. It's embarrassing for us. Their bullet trains travel twice as fast as Acela at its very fastest. When the few times that Acela actually hits its peak speed is half of what the Chinese bullet planes.
Oh man, really? That's so sad.
Are doing. And they have more than 1 billion rides on their bullet trains every year. And those are electrified and increasingly mostly run off of renewable energy. They're electric vehicles. Those batteries charge up to, I think, 85% in 10 or 15 minutes now. So they're just, they're cleaning our clock when it comes to advancing this technology. And it's going to be difficult at this point for us to even catch up. They understood that this was the great opportunity. And Donald Trump has handed them the keys to this car, if you will. And so they're paving the way forward right now. And so you put your finger on something really important. And it's what I alluded to earlier. The world's going to move on. The world is moving on. The United States no longer gets to determine that. Donald Trump doesn't get to determine what happens to the clean energy transition worldwide. It's happening. All he gets to determine is whether we get on board or we get left behind at the station. I actually used that analogy in that op-ed. And what we're doing right now, of course, is slowing it down a little bit globally because, we're not doing everything that we can. We're going in the wrong direction. But it's really creating problems for us. It means we're falling behind in our competitiveness. It's hurting the world a little bit in terms of, the necessary rate at which the clean energy transition has to happen. So you put your finger on something else that's really important. We are making that transition. 85% of all additional power generating technology last year was from renewables. So almost all of the additional power generation we are generating now, we are creating now is coming from renewable energy. Despite what you hear from Trump about coal and natural gas, it's really a drop in the bucket, especially if you look at the rest of the world right now. And so we are moving on. We're not moving fast enough. Without some additional market mechanism, if you're a conservative, if you're a Republican, and it used to be that Republicans supported market mechanisms for dealing with environmental problems.
Yeah.
They said they did, but in fact, they just wanted power. The truth is they subsidized the industries that were donating to their campaigns that they preferred. I thought you were going to say the fact that Republicans used to care and still do care about the outdoors and, fishing.
Oh, well, that's, yes. The Teddy Roosevelt legacy. Yeah. No, there are interesting stories to be told there. For example, William K. Riley was the EPA administrator. He's a good friend of mine. He was actually Reagan's EPA administrator. And he pushed hard. There's actually a great documentary, if you're looking for something to watch, it's educational and interesting, called The White House Effect. And it was about William K. Riley's efforts when he was at the EPA, and he's a real hero in my book. He actually introduced the idea of cap and trade market mechanisms, in that case for dealing with the acid rain problem. But there were others, including William K. Riley, who argued that these same mechanisms could be used to deal with another externality, environmental externality, that doesn't get priced without some sort of signal, price signal, market signal,
right.
Whether it's a tax, whether it's tradable emissions permits, whether it is a clean energy portfolio standard, which is what the Biden administration used in the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a major piece of climate legislation, although it wasn't called that. So it used to be at least we could get a fair number of Republicans and conservatives on board with agreeing that it makes sense to deal with these problems with market mechanisms like tradable permits. And they moved away from that, right? They backed off from that because in the end, you're absolutely right. In the end, they became a wholly owned subsidiary of the polluters, of the fossil fuel industry, and they weren't going to do anything to ruffle their feathers. There was a game going on for a while where they said, well, we don't like a carbon tax. We think there should be a permit system. Then the Democrats proposed, tradable permits. Oh, no, we don't like tradable permits.
Yeah.
We think they were playing that game for a number of years.
Well, we can talk about money and politics and how the campaign finance system has been broken for a long time, but then that would lead to the Supreme Court. And here's one thing I wanted to ask you, which is the Supreme Court, their role in deregulating so much of the regulators who are in charge of polluters, energy companies, et cetera, from the EPA to, there's been some major decisions that the Supreme Court has made. And I don't mean to put you on the spot with asking you about those decisions, but they do matter and they do have an effect. Leading into, I guess, my final question, which is vote for policy makers and lawmakers who will invest in renewable, invest in the future of sustainability, who trust and respect science, the scientific method, who aren't taking money from dirty polluters, and obviously who would change the makeup of the court. So ultimately, no matter what law you pass, couldn't be just thrown out because Neil Gorsuch's mom had hurt feelings? Was it him or who?
Yeah, Ann Burford. Burford, who was the EPA. Was she EPA administrator?
Yeah,
I think she was. Yeah, during.
And generally, when Republicans are in office, almost always from Bush to obviously Trump, the people that they put in charge of agencies are often, almost always, former lobbyists for.
That's right.
They are foxes watching the henhouse every time. They're just there to destroy the regulators so that they can go back in the private sector when they're done and clean up.
Yeah, and there were two exceptions to that rule. There were several exceptions, actually. Eisenhower, that's going a little further back, but his EPA administrator was good. Reagan initially, had, not Reagan, but it was Bush in his first term, George H.W. Bush, who put forward William K. Riley, who was a true environmental advocate and was basically forced out of power by the sort of the polluter contingent within the administration, but at least initially. Same thing happened with Christine Todd Whitman, George W. Bush's first EPA administrator. In fact, she said at the very outset that carbon dioxide is a pollutant that should be regulated under the Clean Air Act. She got forced out by Dick Cheney and his energy industry folks, and she was out, after one term. And so there has been this pattern there. What I would say is this, Pete, you put your finger again, something really important is that no matter what happens, and we'll take climate change. There was a Supreme Court decision. It was, was it after Trump was reelected? It might have been before, but it was in a conservative Supreme Court decision within the last few years that introduced the so-called Chevron standard. Basically, what they said was that the EPA no longer had the authority to make rules based on the science and their own determination. It basically took away regulatory authority from the federal government.
Right.
And that was a significant decision that has all sorts of ramifications now for efforts to deal with climate change and to rein in carbon emissions. And that's a problem that won't easily be fixed, right? If people turn out, and hopefully they will, in droves in the midterm elections and return Congress to a Democratic Party that's at least willing to accept the reality and threat of climate change, just regardless of what your politics are, there is one party now that basically will do something about climate, and one party that's trying to undo all the progress. So it's night and day, and there's no way not to be partisan. There's no way not to be political here. If you care about the environment, you've got to vote for the Democrats now. And even if they take back Congress, you've still got a Supreme Court that's been weaponized against the sorts of actions that are necessary for the near term. And, what would need to happen at this point would be that Democrats take back the Senate. A Democrat would need to become president and put forward Supreme Court candidates who are not, don't come in with ideological opposition to environmental regulation. And they'll need to load the court at this point.
Yep. I mean, it's going to be
wait.
a very heavy lift, but I do feel like I have to get there in this conversation with you. It's like part of it. We identify problems. We talk about the science, talk about media and journalist coverage of it and other influence and players in it. But the bottom line is it does seem to everything ends at the Supreme Court with these rulings, the Chevron doctrine, obviously, but just around campaign finance rules and so on, who gets to donate. But it's not just vote Democrat if you care about the environment. Really, I mean, you wrote this book with Peter Hotez. It's science, really, because we all know about what they believe and what they're selling around simple things like, simple science, not simple science, but viruses and epidemiology. Obviously, I'm sure you just saw about that huge breakthrough that whoever had with RNA development using RNA that they've been able to potentially cure or help treat skin cancer in a way that would be revolutionary, but they don't like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. The gulf between where our science and technology is and where our politics are has never been as great. Carl Sagan alluded to this decades ago. He predicted that that's where we would be, where there would be this amazing technology, and then we would have an electorate that's been dumbed down, that hasn't been educated, and isn't even in a position to litigate how that technology is used or who controls it. It's where we are now. And one thing I would add is that when it comes to Senate races. There should be a litmus test. It isn't just good enough to be a Democrat. You've got to be a Democrat who would be willing to expand the Supreme Court. And if you're not willing to do that, then step down, step away. Yeah. Fully
agree. Earth depends upon it. And upon you, sir, for your expertise all these years. Always great to have you join me. We are friends and we always will be. And I am very happy to see you today. And I am so grateful to have you still on the job, buddy. Thank you so, so much.
Right back at you, my friend.
Well, there you go. Dr. Michael Mann. Go support him. Buy the book, Science Under Siege. It's now out in paperback, and follow him on all the platforms, all that and more. Links in the show notes. Thank you to Bumblebees who listened all the way to the end. You have a name. You're Bumblebees. And I am so proud and grateful to have you guys here. So thank you very, very much. Hi, Sean. Give a shout out to Sean. He mentioned it yesterday. Reminder. That's all I've got for you. John Carroll takes us in on that. He writes the music for the show. You should go support him. johncarroll.org right now. Buy his new album and have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and for supporting me and my work, and be the change you want to see. Okay. Don't worry. Everything's going to be just fine. Stay in the moment.
When the tyrants taunt you and the sirens teach you, better stand up. Stand up. Let the brave meet the challenge. Let the weak flee. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up on your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run there.